Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for community project funding grantees regarding forms and submissions. I'm Randall Mullen with TDA Consulting, and I will further introduce myself and the co-presenter momentarily. Before we begin the presentation, I do want to cover the logistics. If you participated previously, you're probably familiar with this guidance. All participants will be muted during the webinar, so you will participate in listen mode unless we tell you otherwise. As is customary, the PowerPoint slides will be available on the HUD Exchange soon after the webinar, and I will soon show you where the slides are for the prior sessions. Although you will participate in listen mode, we still do want you to actively participate and become engaged. You may submit related questions covering the content in the chat feature of Zoom, sending those questions to everyone. Jennifer, the co-presenter, and I will monitor the chat and answer the clarifying questions when possible as they're asked during the presentation, but we're also going to pause from time to time at the end of each of the sections, read aloud those frequently asked questions, and then orally answer them for all of you to hear. And as in the prior webinars, we have reserved time for a Q&A period toward the end of the presentation where we'll invite HUD representatives to answer the more difficult questions and clarify answers that we presenters may have provided earlier as necessary. Here is the agenda that we'll follow today. As I mentioned, it will begin with introductions, followed by a brief review this time of the prior cohort webinars, and then we'll begin our presentation on forms and submission. After we cover those agenda items, we will have that final Q&A period, as I mentioned, and identify resources at the HUD Exchange to further guide your preparations for submitting the forms and making submission to HUD. And lastly, we will invite you to complete an evaluation this time before you end participation in the webinar, but still give you the option to complete the evaluation at a later time. Now I'll begin the introductions and then tag my co-presenter, Jennifer, who will introduce herself, and she will in turn tag the HUD representatives who are joining us today. You see here who is expected to attend. Again, my name is Randall Mullen, and I'm with TDA Consulting, where I've worked for many years as both a vice president and as a senior consultant on a wide range of housing and community development projects. I've recently assisted HUD in explaining guidance around special congressional appropriations. That work has included both recovery from natural disasters and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, plus recovery from its associated economic impacts, and now the CPF program. The co-presenter today is Jennifer Alpha. Jennifer, will you please introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, thanks Randall. Pleasure to be here with everybody today. My name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm a senior consultant with TDA Consulting. I've been with TDA about 12 years, so about half the time that Randall has. I focus the work that I do on home, NSP, CDBG, CDBG-CV, as well as CDBG-DR, and special programs like CPF. And so I'm excited to get to talk with you all today about this last component of your application package. Hopefully you've all been to the other cohort sessions, and so you're in the home stretch. And with that, I will turn it over to our HUD folks. Connor, would you like to start?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Connor Leroux. I'm a program analyst with the Congressional Grants Division at HUD, working alongside TDA to work to provide all these TA resources for CPF grantees. And I'll move it over to Ramel if he's with us today.
I am. Just give me 1 second. I'm turning on my camera. Hi, everybody. My name is Ramel Calderwood. I'm one of the CPF grant officers located at HUD headquarters, and I work with grantees located in the states of Alaska and Washington. And I'll pass it off to my colleague, Eric.
Thank you so much, Ramel. And my name is Eric Yost. I'm a Senior Community Planning and Development Specialist in our Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Development, which is home to two departments, our Office of Economic Development and our Office of Rural Housing and Economic Development. And in our Office of Economic Development, we have our Congressional Grants Division. So we're really honored to be here today and support all of you in your efforts to go through this cohort, and appreciate all your feedback and engagements to submit your grant material packages. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Randall. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for making those introductions. We'll begin with a brief cohort overview. The CPF cohort is assembled to receive specific guidance that you will need to make satisfactory completion of the grant materials and then to submit them. And you were invited to join this cohort based upon an award of a fiscal year 2022 CPF grant. To facilitate and support this cohort, you are enrolled in a learning management system called Absorb, which is hosted by TDA Consulting. Now, the previous sessions shown here were held on the dates identified and covered requirements for submission of your grant materials, beginning with project narratives. That is, what must be described in a full project description. Second, we covered the budget, explaining how to itemize not only the planned uses of your grant, but also identify sources of funding for the entire project. And then lastly, environmental review, where we covered when and how to assess the impacts of your project on the environment and vice versa. Today's session on forms and submissions will specifically assist you with completion and submission of the required forms and related content necessary to finally enter into that grant agreement and start your community project. Now, I do want to point out that to obtain valuable resources and information on those prior webinars, you will want to check out the new CPF program landing page. If you haven't yet signed up for HUD Exchange listserv, you may do so there as well to obtain updates. If you've already signed up, you will want to add the CPF program to your notifications. And I've been asked by the HUD officials to actually share with you the website, and I will now navigate to it, and ideally you all will be able to see what I switched to, and we'll quickly navigate through it. This is the new HUD Exchange website for community project funding. And if we scroll down to resources, you will find that the fiscal year 2022 cohort is identified here, and the materials that I referenced earlier for the prior webinars appear at that location. Furthermore, you can join the CPF mailing list by clicking here, or if you have not enrolled in the HUD Exchange listserv, you can do so there as well. And if there are any questions about that, please indicate in the chat, and Jennifer will try to help you with answers. We'll go back now to the presentation. The forms and submission topic is the last in the series. The previous webinars covered content, as I had mentioned earlier, and in covering that content, we offered you guidance on the grant materials related to those very topics of narrative, budget, and environmental review. We're now turning attention to the requirements for submission, which are actually contained in what is referred to as the attachments of the grant guide. Now, once again, you will find that Jennifer and I are going to explain the guidance on this topic, forms and submission, based upon the FY22 guide, just as we did on those earlier topics. And Jennifer and I will detail first the key forms and instructions with a focus on the SF424, which is the application for federal assistance, other required forms, and then a grantee submission checklist that is a useful tool or aid that will help you ensure that you are completing your packet fully before you make submission. But before we dive in, it's time for a poll, and Jennifer is going to take it through here.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first poll. I'm going to launch it, and you should see that in just a moment. And the question asks, where are you in the grant award process? So have you just started to work on your application packet? Have you submitted your packet, but you've been asked to make revisions? Or are you waiting for your grant agreement from HUD? So in that case, you've already submitted your package and things went well. We'll give folks a few minutes to chime in. Looks like we've got about half of the folks who've answered so far. We'd love to hear from everyone. All right. Looks like it's slowed down enough that we can end the poll. And it looks like folks are just getting started for the most part. We've got about 75% of the respondents saying that they're just getting started. About 15% have already submitted their package. Congratulations. And they've been asked to make revisions. And then we've got about 10% who are waiting for your grant agreements. So it sounds like you all have major submissions and things went well, or you were able to correct things that needed to be corrected. So congrats to you as well. Thank you all for sharing that. It helps us to understand where folks are in the process and where assistance may be needed. All right.
Okay, Jennifer, if you'll stop sharing the poll, we'll continue then.
Okay. Is it still, are you still seeing it?
I closed it, and
okay,
it
great.
looks like we're ready to go.
Perfect.
As I mentioned, the key forms that 75% of you need to fill out begin with the standard form 424, or the application for federal assistance. Those of you who represent grantees that receive other HUD funding, you're probably familiar with this standard application for that federal assistance. But other grantees among you are possibly encountering it for the first time. As Jennifer noted in the poll results, if you are just starting out, it's important to start on the right foot, and we will attempt to help you do that through the course of this webinar. The SF424 application for federal assistance is the common application for an organization to receive federal funding from either HUD or other departments as well. It provides basic information on your organization as a grantee, which requests those funds be made available by special appropriation of Congress. As such, your organization is viewed as an applicant, and you must carefully identify and describe the organization along with the planned community project and its funding source. How can you obtain this form? Well, first, you would, again, want to refer to the fiscal year 2022 CPF guide and turn, as shown on this slide, to page 16, where you would find the specific guidance. as I will demonstrate, you will use the link that you see embedded in this guide on page 16, and it will take your computer to the related HUD web page, and then you will follow the steps that are listed here for finding the SF424 at grants.gov. Although I do want to point out that when I navigate away now and stop sharing this particular item and instead share the HUD landing page for the form SF424, there is a different image because grants.gov has recently refreshed its look. So let's navigate away from this particular item, and I will share with you the landing page for the HUD Exchange. And as you see here, you are offered the very same instructions that I'll go back to on the slide, which suggests that you visit grants.gov, and then there you follow instructions that are indicated here, 1, 2, and 3. And what we're going to do now is actually move on to the grants.gov page. And I will share it as a new view. This is the refreshed grants.gov landing page. And what you will see here is that it's necessary to pull down on this menu for forms to SF424 family. Now that may throw you. I know it did me the first time that I encountered that phrase, but it's distinguishing those grant applications that are to benefit a whole community as opposed to individuals in the community. So we will click here, and then that will bring up this new look of the forms, which include a way of determining how you want to search through the list. And I'd call to your attention that we're in the SF424 family forms, the community forms. And if you click over here on the second column, the directional arrow, you will land where I am right now. I'll reverse how I did this. I just clicked here, and it brought up in alphabetical order the forms. And fortunately, application for federal assistance starts with an A, and it appears right here. And you can find the form, Acrobat form here, the PDF file, as well as the instructions here. I will call attention while we're at this page that related forms that I'm going to cover momentarily also appear here, and they're actually on the second and third. I mean the next 2 lines on this list of forms. So I will stop there now, and we'll go back to the slide presentation. And what you see here is the same instructions that I mentioned earlier. You go to grants.gov and select forms SF424 family, and then the application for federal assistance. But what you want to do then is download the form, and I want to point out a couple of detailed experiences that all of us have when we are oftentimes downloading forms today where there's such concern about security. You will find that your computer's browser settings, mine using Google Chrome, now requires that I permit download of an opening of Adobe files as a permission that I'm granting to the browser. And it's possible that those of you who've had trouble maybe locating that form need to add a permission to your computer browser's settings. But what's probably most important to take away from this slide is that even though you're going to, as indicated where I've circled in red here, download the application for federal assistance and obtain the general instructions for the form, you also want to note that you will follow those instructions plus specific CPF instructions that appear on page 18 of the CPF guide. So continuing through the presentation, if you choose and do successfully download the form, you can complete it, of course, on your computer with Adobe Acrobat, or it may be handwritten in the event that you don't have Adobe Acrobat or find it just simply easier to fill out the form by hand. It's not recommended, but it is acceptable under circumstances, given that these grants are awarded to community groups that sometimes may not have the full capacity to complete a form online or with Acrobat Reader. But again, in all instances, you're going to follow the specific instructions on page 18. And the reason that's important is because there will be a reference that I make soon to box 21 relating what you're stating in the form to additional certifications beyond the first attestation that appears earlier. More on that in just a moment. Now, to correctly follow the specific instructions, you must possess 3 essential pieces of information. The first is the legal name of your organization. The second is its unique entity identifier from sam.gov. What that means is each grantee, therefore, must have an active registration with sam.gov, and then look as well at the third item of information, the award details in the Joint Explanatory Statement, or JES, from the congressional record that documents the appropriation of funds for your community project. Now, you see on the left-hand side here the fillable form and then the specific instructions that highlight the points that I made. I draw attention to the center image, the specific instructions, and item A shown right here, which is vitally important because that's where you will identify the legal name of your organization, how it appears in all official legal documents and the other places such as the EIN, as well as in the JES. And then as noted in the third column here, it is important that you recognize that there are additional certifications and assurances. First, by checking I agree in box 21, which is instructed here, your representative will be attesting in box number 21 that, and as they sign and date the form, they're providing assurances and attesting that the information in your application on this form, that so-called foregoing information, is, quote, true, complete, and accurate. Now, I mentioned the related forms, and this is where it does get a little complicated, and we'll be pausing to take questions in just a few more seconds. The related SF42 forms are completed after you finish with the SF424 application for federal assistance. Your authorized representative must make further assurances that fit your community project, the type of project that it is that you will undertake in your community with the CPF funding. depending on the type of project, you must download and complete one or both of the above forms that are shown here. They're variations of the SF424. One is labeled B, the other is D. As you see, the first of those two relates to non-construction programs, say public services, whereas D relates to construction activities or projects. Each form requires your representative to provide related additional assurances that fit those types of grant assisted activities. And consequently, as this call out notes, you probably would want to check with your grant officer if necessary to gain clarification on what additional form or whether both additional forms are necessary in your grant award. Okay, we're going to pause for questions here, and I will turn back to Jennifer to see what questions have arisen. And here we're, Jennifer, just going to read out those most common questions so far, and then you can read aloud what answer you have provided.
Yeah, so far we have not received any questions on the forms. However, someone did ask about where the recordings for the past cohorts have been posted. So both the slides and the recordings are posted, and Connor went ahead and dropped the link for the recordings into the chat. So if you haven't located those yet on the HUD Exchange, they are up and the link for them is in the chat.
Yes, and in the event that you don't grab that link while it is in the chat, we also include that new landing page that I shared with you for the CPF program on the resources list that will appear at the end of this presentation. And all you have to do is, as Connor has indicated here, is just scroll down to that blue folder, if you will, that is headed FY22 cohort, and that's where you'll find the resources for this cohort of grantees.
Great. Oh, and Randall, someone asked if you could repeat how they would know if the SF424 is needed.
I think that you're referring to the SF424D.
Yes, sorry. Yes, the
yes.
D form.
And,
yes.
And the short answer is by thoughtfully considering what your project is. Does it include construction? Or is it more than construction? If it includes construction and non-construction activities, say public services, the example that I used, then you would need both forms. If it's only a construction project, you would need perhaps only one of the additional forms. But the best thing to do, as this call out indicates here, check with your grant officer to learn what additional SF forms may apply, either one or both of these two, the SF424B or SF424D. And when we reach the Q&A, time permitting, we will maybe ask the HUD representatives, especially Rommel, who's a grant officer, to elaborate on what I have said.
That's good, thank you.
Okay, Jennifer, I will stop presenting now and just advance the slides for you regarding other required forms.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about two other required forms, and they are the SFLLL, which is the Disclosure of Lobbying Activities form. And we'll also be reviewing the SF 1199A, which is the Direct Deposit Sign-up form. Well, let's get started on those. Okay, so this SFLLL form, you will complete this fully if you have any funds other than federal appropriated funds that have been paid or will be paid to any person for influencing or attempting to influence. There's a long list here: an officer, an employee of any agency, a member of Congress, an officer or an employee of Congress, or an employee or a member of Congress in connection with this federal grant. So if you are using any funds other than federally appropriated funds to lobby, then you're going to need to complete this form in full. And you'll see that there are several fields you'll need to fill out here in this form. If you are not using funds other than federal appropriated funds to lobby, then you still want to submit this form. However, you will note that it is not applicable in Part 10. So in Part 10 of that form, you're still going to just drop an NA in that part and then have the form submitted along with your package. And you can see that on the next slide here, we're showing you where that guidance is located. So you can find that information in the grant guide. And you can see here on page 18 and 19 of the grant guide, it will walk you through this requirement for the disclosure of lobbying activities form. You can see down here in the bold text, it says if there are no lobbying activities in association with this award, you should indicate not applicable on the form and submit it with the other application materials. So you can use the link that's on the HUD webpage to access this form. Similar to the ones that Randall described, you're going to download this in Adobe Reader, and then you can fill it out. It is a fillable form. If you do not have Adobe Reader and you want to fill it out manually, again, that is allowable, not preferable, but you can do it that way if you need to. All right, next slide then. Oh, we kind of got into some of what I just talked about. So this form can be completed with a computer using Adobe Acrobat. Again, you would just need to download it. Be mindful of those troubleshooting tips that Randall provided to you. And if you have any questions about how to complete the form, you can look at the grant guide for fiscal year 22 on pages 18 and 19. There is a note that we wanted to make with, you can go back, Randall. Yeah, so there's a note that we wanted to make with respect to the certification regarding lobbying. So if you're a prospective grantee and your authorized representative has checked I agree and signs the SF 424, as we've just explained, and they've signed that after HUD issued the updated fiscal year 2022 CPF grant guide, then you'll not be required to submit any separate certifications regarding lobbying. You'll just need to submit that SFLLL disclosure form. So the SF424 will cover those lobbying certifications if you're submitting that form after HUD had issued the grant guide. And for most of you, since 75% of you are still working on your package, you're going to fall into this category. So your SF424 is going to cover that lobbying certification for the most part, but you will still have to complete the SFLLL, which is that form that we just showed you. Hopefully that's clear. If it's not, please drop a question in the chat. Okay, our next form we're going to talk about is our direct deposit form, and this is how you will receive your funds from HUD. If you set up after you set up the direct deposit. To do that, you're going to establish the direct deposit by filling out the form SF 1199A, and you can access this form on the HUD website. There, we'll show you in a moment what the grant guide provides in the link that you will need to access this form. But you as the grantee will complete section 1 of this form, and then your bank or financial institution must complete section 3 of the form. So it is a 2-part process. The completed form is then emailed to your grant officer. Note that you are not mailing this to HUD. There is a note at the bottom that says you should mail the form. We don't want you to mail the form. We want you to email it to your grant officer. Okay, so you're going to take this direct deposit form. You're going to complete section 1. Your bank's going to complete section 3. And then you're going to mail this form by email to your grant officer. Okay, so then we'll go to our next slide. This is the section of the grant guide that you can refer to if you have any questions or you want to access that link for the SF 1199 direct deposit form. It's there on page 19. So right there on page 19, it's going to tell you that you need to complete this form. Here's the link for it. And then on page 20, you can see that there are sort of itemized information on what is required for each of the sections. So for instance, in section 1, you're going to print your name, address, and telephone number. You're going to print your grant number. You're going to print the EIN, your organization's EIN, check the type of account you want your funds deposited into, type or print the account number you would like the funds deposited into, and then just follow those steps there for completing that whole section 1. And then section 3 will be completed by your bank. I'll go to the next slide. Again, so this form can be completed on a computer. You can follow the specific instructions in the grant guide on pages 19 and 20. You need to complete the sections 1 and 2. Your financial institution will complete section 3. You also want to include a voided check or deposit slip with the form when you email it to your grant officer. Note that a signed letter from your bank is also acceptable if you can't provide a check or deposit slip. The letter does need to be from the bank and include your banking information on it. So the form, a voided check or deposit slip, and those 2 things completed go to your grant officer by email. Just to reiterate that. If you do not have a voided check or a deposit slip, then you can get a signed letter from your bank that includes all of the banking information that would regularly appear on a voided check or a deposit slip. So then you want to verify that all of the contents on this form are accurate prior to submitting it. This is an important step to double check all of your information that you've inputted to make sure that the funds will be deposited into the right account. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the required forms that need to be submitted with your application package. However, we wanted to talk a little bit about the grantee submission checklist because it is a very useful tool in making sure that you're submitting all the necessary materials that are required for your application.
And Jennifer, before we go there, we do have one question that has been raised in the chat, and I'll read it, and then together maybe we can answer it. The one question is from Ashley, who asks, will this need to be a separate interest-bearing account, or is that not allowed? So Ashley's wanting to know about opening the account as you had described with the local financial institution, and must she specify that it is an interest-bearing account, and if so, what does that mean?
I think that's a question we'd like to hear from HUD on.
Yeah, my understanding, and we can perhaps gain confirmation, is it must be an interest-bearing account, but you would then remit any interest earned as program income for your grant, and there will be more on that topic later. However, I do want to bring in either Connor, Romel, or Eric, because I think that there often are special circumstances or instructions related to these so-called special appropriations from Congress, and perhaps one of the HUD officials can clarify before we move on to grantee submission checklist. And if any of you, Rommel, you're off mute now. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, Connor, do you want to go ahead?
You can go ahead if you have an answer for him, and I can follow up too.
Right. Yeah, this is a great question. From what I understand, the account where the CPF funds are to be deposited should not be bearing any interest because essentially you are reimbursed, we're reimbursing you for your expenses. So that money cannot be sitting in your account accumulating interest when it's meant to reimburse you for your incurred expenses. So we're not allowing you to advance, so we're not advancing the payment upfront. You are to be reimbursed for your incurred expenses. And I'm trying to find the regulation that cites it, but that's what what I've gathered.
Thanks, Ramel. I was going to say the same thing, that we don't want it to be an interest-bearing account. If there's a situation where funds were being deposited in an interest-bearing account, any substantial interest that would be that would come out of funds being in that account, that I think would be an issue. We would want those funds either to go back into the program as program income or return to HUD. But yeah, we would say that, this should not be in an interest-bearing account.
That's what. Thank you for those clarifying points, and that will help you actually figure out how to handle the deposit and find the right account with your financial institution. Okay, Jennifer, back to you.
Great, thank you. So again, we're going to take a moment to take a look at the submission checklist, because this is a tool that will help you ensure that you're submitting all the necessary items that are required as part of the application package. This is not a required form. We just want to be clear about that. You don't need to submit this as a form with your package, but you can use it as a tool to ensure that you've covered all of the required elements, which will in turn help the reviewers get through this review process a bit faster. You'll have fewer errors in your package, and hopefully that means a quicker approval. So we definitely want to take some time as one of the last parts of this cohort series to go over this submission checklist with you. So on this checklist, it's going to walk you through all the different components that we've covered across the cohort series, and just ensure that you have a list that you can use to double check your application package and make sure that everything that needs to go to HUD is included. So first on this checklist, the grantee has an active registration in the SAM.gov system. And we understand that this is a common error in the application packages, that grantees often have not set up their registration in SAM.gov. So double check that you have an active registration in SAM.gov. And the active word is important there as well. You may have registered in SAM.gov, but if it is no longer active, you may need to take the steps to ensure that it is active before you submit your application package. So that's number one. You have an active registration in SAM.gov. You want to make sure that the legal name of the funding recipient in the SF424s is the same as the entity named in the JES or the technical corrections. So just make sure that in your forms, you are using the same legal name that is in the JES or the technical corrections. You also want to make sure that the amount of the requested grant is the same as the amount authorized in the JES. And then you want to make sure that all of your 424 forms, as they are required, are properly executed and dated. So Randall talked you through those SF424 forms and how they may be applicable to your projects. And we're going to do a little exercise that's going to help you think that through a little bit more in a moment. But you want to make sure that all of those, as they're required, are properly executed and dated. So you want to make sure that your project narrative describes the entire project and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with CPF grant funds. And cohort number 1 in this series was a whole cohort just discussing the narrative and how you can ensure that you have a complete and comprehensive narrative. So if you missed that session, make sure you go back and you watch that, because on this checklist, as you can see, one of the things you want to confirm is that your project narrative describes the entire project. And then you want your project budget to be consistent with the requirements of the applicable appropriation acts and cost principles in 2 CFR Part 200. We also had a whole cohort session on the budget. That was session 2. So you can go back and reference that for additional details on how to properly compile a budget for your projects. And then finally, you want to take a look at these indirect cost checklist items. There are some sub questions here asking, will you charge an indirect cost to the grant? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, you want to think about whether you're opting to follow the de minimis rate, or if you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. And so we also cover the indirect cost rate considerations in that budget cohort session. So if you do want to understand more about indirect cost rates, you can look back at that budget cohort session and that'll give you a little more detail. Okay, so that's our checklist. You can find this checklist in the grant guide on page 48. Again, this is not a required form. However, it will help you ensure that you have a complete and thorough submission. And some of the items on the checklist, as we just went through them, you can see that they're not forms, but they're action items. And so you want to look back at those previous cohort sessions for some guidance on completing those action items appropriately. There were the cohort sessions on narrative, on budget, and on the third session on environmental. But those 2 sessions on narrative and budget are probably going to be really helpful for you as you go through that checklist and ensure that you've covered all the bases and checked the right boxes. Now, once you have all of your application materials compiled and you have your forms completed, then you're going to submit all of this information as a package to both your grant officer and to the email address cpfgrants@hud.gov. So this application package is submitted by email, and you want to make sure that it's going both to your grant officer as well as to that CPF email box, which is cpfgrants@hud.gov. And with that, I think it's time for another little poll/exercise.
Yes, indeed. And I would like to set up an example that illustrates what a typical grantee would ideally do with the grantee submission checklist that Jennifer just went over. First, the grantee representative would assemble all the necessary materials as she went down that list, and they would reference the checklist, determine what they have completed, and thoughtfully check the boxes before submitting the grant application packet. But oftentimes, the experience many have had is that you'll be unsure about certain of those items. And I want to take as an example a hypothetical grantee. I'm going to navigate away now from this slide and share with you a description of ABC Housing Services, Inc. and their particular project and how they are completing this grantee submission checklist along the lines of what Jennifer just went over. This is a document that includes at the top here very succinct information about ABC Housing Services project. You see that their name is ABC Housing Services, Inc. They have received a $5 million grant, and that grant is for a construction of supportive housing on a lot purchased with other funds. So it is a project that includes building the supportive housing, including space for delivery of those public services that support the residents or tenants. And it's on a lot that they have purchased, that the housing nonprofit has purchased with other funds. They are a part of the fiscal year 2022 cohort, and they're kind of under the gun. They know that their target date for submitting the grant application is December 15th. They're optimistic that they'll then enter into a grant agreement and undertake the project in early 2024. So they have gone through this checklist and marked off the fact that they have an active registration with sam.gov, but they're not exactly certain about the name of their organization being correct as an entity that is also registered, uses the exact same name as their UEI, or that name is what appears in the JES, or a technical correction to the record, which might make the name conform with their legal name. They are, however, certain that they've requested the right amount of funds, that they have completed the SF 424 itself, the main application for federal assistance, but they've hesitated to check off the SF 424B. It's that form that relates to non-construction program or project activities, and they have not determined yet whether they should check that off. They are certain they're constructing supportive housing, so they figure they do need the SF 424D, which is clearly for construction. They're also clear about how to fill out the lobbying form, but then they are unclear or uncertain that their project narrative describes the entire project and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant funds. They did include a budget, and they're under the de minimis indirect cost rate. So what we're now going to do with ABC Housing Services is consider the information that appears here at the top. They're a hypothetical grantee that is facing common questions about where they're unsure that their grant application is complete. And I'm now in lieu of actually launching a poll within Zoom. We're going to take a look at the questions that Jennifer and I have framed in respect to this particular application. And what you see here is again the question that is framing this whole activity. Are you ready to submit? I would like for each of you to pretend you are the grantee representative for ABC Housing Services, and you're trying to answer the questions that would indicate whether, after you've researched these three items, whether that content that you have found is displayed under this first column here meets the requirement, and therefore you can check off yes on that particular item. And what we're going to ask that you do is, as I facilitate us going through each of these documents, you will just enter either the word YES, yes, or NO, no, in the chat, and Jennifer will gain a sense of what this cohort's representatives of roughly 25 people believe is the correct answer. ABC Housing Services representative has looked at their agency's official name as it appears on legal documents, and they think that they met the requirement that appears here, which says the legal name of the funding recipient on the SF 424 is the same as the entity named in the JES, which is supposed to tie back to what appears as the UEI per the active registration with SAM.gov. So if you're the representative and you find that you believe the agency is correctly named exactly on as it appears on all your legally required documents, including those that I just listed, what would you check off here? And just please enter in the chat yes or no, so that we can kind of get a sense. And I see one yes, two no's. Please add your answer. There are almost 24 people here. So unknown on some of the docs because doing business as. Okay, now this is about the ABC Housing Services example that we're providing. So what would you say, yes or no? We'll give just a few more minutes for others to answer. I'm seeing a few more yeses than no, but there are a lot of no's here. If you haven't yet answered the question with regard to ABC Housing Services representative, you're pretending to be that person, and you think that the agency is correctly named as it shows on all legal documents on your SF 424. So I see that there's a Jennifer, what's your sense of the most common answer? Is it yes or no, or is it maybe in some instances?
Yeah, it looks sort of like a mix, honestly. I'd say we're probably at about half and half. Half say yes, half say no of those who answer.
Okay. All right. Well, since I'm wanting to check one of these, I'll check yes first, but we'll also note that it could be no and move on to the second item. And that is the one the representative is uncertain about in respect to the related forms that support the SF 424 application for federal assistance. And the requirement is that you, of course, complete the SF 424, the application for federal assistance, the main form, but then to add specific assurances for your type of project, you may have to add one or more of the additional forms, the SF 424B, which relates to non-construction programs, as well as the SF 424D for construction programs. Now, you may remember the representative has already checked off the construction form, and will have the representative add the certifications that cover construction projects, but he or she is uncertain about whether the non-construction form should be used. So what do you all think in regard to that item on the checklist? Should you check it off if you were the representative for ABC Housing Services, that's again undertaking a grant assisted project for supportive housing that involves the construction of the housing and the related services funded by their grant, but on land that has been purchased with funds from another source? So what would be the answer in that case? Okay, Maddie's indicated they should use that form, so the answer would be yes. They have determined the form is required for their housing/service projects, so they would say yes, we can check off that item. That part of our grantee submission packet is complete. What are others of you think? Do you agree with Maddie, or do you have a different viewpoint? We'll give you just another moment here to add either yes or no, or maybe. I see a yes from Joanna Rowe. Anyone else want to weigh in? Again, the representative thinks that they do have they're required to include the SF 424 for non-construction programs. Okay, I see other yeses. Jennifer, we have fewer responses. These questions get harder, or items are harder as you move down the list. But does it appear more saying yes than no?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
they're
we'll
all
mark
saying
this off as a yes and go to the last question, which I will point out to you is a little tricky. ABC Housing Services, again, is undertaking a project for supportive housing. They're constructing new housing and offering supportive services on a site, a lot that they have purchased with other funds. The requirement is that their project narrative describes the entire project and indicates specific activities that will be financed with CPF grant funds. If they have written a project narrative and description for the whole project and have identified in their budget the uses of the grant funds, but nothing more. They've only covered the uses of the grant in their budget. Does that meet the requirement? And here again, this is the last item. You may indicate whether yes, it's sufficient just to describe the uses of the grant in your budget, or no, if you think there's more that ABC Housing Services representatives should say we need to do. I'm seeing Maddie says no. Christina Gare says no. What do others of you think? Jennifer, it looks like we have some clear no's here.
it does. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll mark no here, which probably means that ABC Housing Services isn't quite ready to submit. Let's go back now to the presentation slides, and I will share with you what is the correct answers. Okay, the first question in the mind of the representative related to the agency correctly naming itself on all its legal documents. And if it has checked off that first item where the grantee has an active registration with SAM, and they know that that has created the entity name, the UEI, and they've looked and found that official legal name is also in the JES, then they can consider it to be yes and check off that item in addition to the others that they have checked off with a red check mark. If, however, there is even the slightest variation, that can be an issue, and we would urge ABC Housing Services representative to check with their grant officer and see if, in fact, they can check off that item and complete their SF 424 and application packet as it stands. Any thoughts or comments that you would like to add there, Jennifer, before we move on to item 2?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, item 2 relates to that sometimes confusing part about what additional SF 42 forms are necessary to support the application for federal assistance. And the correct answer here is yes. The form that the representative thinks is required for their housing/service project is required and would need to be properly executed. That's the SF 424B. And the reason is that's for the non-construction part of their funding under the CPF, which is to cover both the construction and the the delivery of the supportive services. And they would check off that box, adding to the certifications that are the standard ones on the application for federal assistance, including the SF 424D for the construction part of their program and the related assurances and certifications, and then also the non-construction certifications, which would cover the services and perhaps any other kind of non-construction service or activity that they would undertake for their supportive housing program and project. The last one is the most tricky of the three, and that is they think they've described the whole project and included a budget that identifies the uses of the grant. Perhaps it's even the required line item budget. And it may be consistent with the requirements of the appropriations acts, but for the fact that they didn't include the entirety of the project and supported it with a sources and uses budget that includes the purchase of that lot or the site, which was bought with other sources of funds. Their budget must include that entire description in the narrative. And part of the reason for this is the importance of describing the full project to ensure that the environmental clearance covers the full scope of the project, but also to later report on the project and capture the benefits that are derived from a ABC Housing Services supportive housing project. So in this case, are they ready to submit? Not quite. They have one more item, and that would be to expand their sources and uses budget to include the source for the purchase of the lot and anything else that might be perhaps under the delivery of the supportive services that involves other sources as well. Because what HUD would want to see and the Congress would want to assure is the intent of completing that full project is achieved by the award of the $5 million grant, which necessarily would include the land on which to build the project, the services that are going to be covered by the grant, but then other services and case management and staffing that would be required to deliver those services fully, wrapping around the housing units. Okay, that takes us to the questions and answers section of our webinar. And are there any questions that you've seen that we need to address, Jennifer, or do we need to offer clarification on how the activity landed?
No, I don't think anyone needs clarification on the activity. However, we did get some questions that came in on some of the last topics we covered before we start the exercise. So let me go back to those.
Well, as you're doing that, I do see that Maddie thought that I'd said ABC wasn't sure of their name. I'll go back to the preceding slide here to point out the agency thinks that they have correctly named that ABC Housing Services, Inc. on the SF 424. They think it's as it appears on all the legal documents. And that would include a legal document that would be the joint explanatory statement of an act of Congress, which identifies what the name is as the funds were appropriated, or through a technical correction that brings it in alignment. So we just want to stress, Maddie and others, that it's important that you first register, as Jennifer, you'd pointed out, with sam.gov. If you're not already registered, you look there and see if the unique entity identifier corresponds with how you've been entering into agreements, under your legal name, not the doing business as, but the legal name, and that then is what is appearing on the SF 424 in Block 8.
Thank you for that clarification. There actually was another question that came in related to SAM.gov, and they Ashley asked actually, if there are additional SAM.gov supports outside of their troubleshooting chat. I'm not familiar with other supports, but I'm wondering if maybe the HUD reps have any suggestions for where folks can go to better understand what's needed for SAM.gov.
I'll take that question, Jennifer. So that's definitely really important for us to be able to advance your application, is to get your UEI SAM.gov registered. I did have a grantee that unfortunately had a really big issue, and in getting assistance from the technical help desk that manages SAM.gov. So if that does happen, if you have not heard back from the help desk within 10 business days, reach out to your grant officer. What I had to do here is actually, when I found out about that issue, I did reach out to one of our contacts here at HUD who can help I guess streamline the process a little bit more. And so, just let your grant officer know that you've made attempts to reach out to SAM.gov's technical assistance line. For whatever reason, they're not getting the help that you need to move forward. And then he or she will be able to, bring in our HUD person to help streamline or, bridge that process, or I'm sorry, troubleshoot that issue.
Great, thank you. And then we had another question that wondered, once an application is submitted, about how long should they expect to receive a response?
I should just stay on camera, but I'll take that question because I often get that question asked from grantees. So unfortunately, the answer that I give to grantees is that it depends. There's a lot of factors involved. So that issue with the UEI, hopefully it's not an issue for everybody, but it does happen. So that could take some time. We're nearing some major holidays right now. And so, folks are in and out, both at HUD and, your organizations. So it's really going to kind of depend on, different factors. But like what I say is that we are working as quickly as possible to get your application reviewed and approved, and then, ultimately get you all access to the funds that you are entitled to getting.
Great, thank you. Another question asks, is there a hard deadline for submission of revised materials?
There's, for me, I typically just ask the grantee to get their application materials, whether it's the new one or the revised materials, in as quickly as possible. The sooner the better, just, obviously, so we can process your materials and give you additional feedback, and then advance it to the next chain of command here at HUD, and get your fully executed grant agreement back to your authorized representative.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the FY 2022 cohort, at least we're trying to get you all under grant obligation, or sorry, a fully executed grant agreement, before the end of the calendar year, because we are working with the FY 2023 cohort, and potentially, another cohort coming on for 2024.
Great, thank you. Okay, so it's a longer question. I haven't read the entire thing yet, but I'm going to read it aloud. It asks, can you please clarify what they mean by subaward and subrecipient from paragraph H in the grant agreement on page 3? That's where that terminology is used. If we issue a subcontract with another entity, is that considered a subaward? And the entity is a subrecipient. So yes, that is the question here. So page 3 of the grant agreement references subawards and subrecipients. And the question is whether if they were to issue a subcontract with another entity, if that is what is considered the subaward and subrecipient. And I would say yes.
And Jennifer, I would
Anybody
agree
have
with
any
that
other thoughts?
answer. You know, you and I have both received that question numerous times in this setting and others. The term subaward is used in the Uniform Administrative Requirements for federal grants at 2 CFR Part 200, and there has been a concerted effort on the part of the federal government to clarify what is a subrecipient as opposed to a vendor or a contractor. And the short version of the answer is if a specific entity to whom you are making a subaward is assisting you in the delivery of your program or project, they're probably a subrecipient. If, on the other hand, they're providing you with goods and services that in a way support your program or project, they're a vendor or a contractor. And there are also, you know, gray areas in between where you may have partners or those to whom you are making a subaward who are coordinating with you on a different part of the project. ABC Housing Services may have received the award in one entity, but they have a partner that is providing the services. One's a developer, one is a service provider. So it really all depends. And if you're, again, hesitant, what we would probably urge, and I'm guessing Ramel would agree with this, is check with your grant officer, because it largely depends upon the project narrative, the scope, and the way that your entity as the recipient is created, and whether it has any subsidiaries or not. Typically, a subrecipient is a separate entity. It's not just a part of the entity that's receiving the grant. Ramel, did you want to add anything to that explanation?
I think you explained it really well, and I agree that I think just reaching out to your grant officer and you know, getting their opinion on the subrecipient, or you know, if they end up actually being a contractor or a vendor, then I think that would be good. For me, I ask my grantees to identify their proposed subrecipient or subrecipients
Yes.
in their project narrative, and so I'm able to then you know, give them the proper guidance in that case. Sometimes like they tell me that they don't have a subrecipient, but then they actually do, and then they have to go back and revise their narrative.
Great. I think that is the last of the questions that we got. There's some more personal questions that came in, and we're following up with those folks individually. But in terms of general questions about the content today, I think we've covered everything that's come through. All right. Well, with that, then we'll head into our wrap up. If you do have other questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat. We'll keep an eye on that as we wrap up here, just in case something comes to mind in these last few minutes. But today's session 4 on forms does conclude this series of webinars for the CPF cohort. You can obtain all the webinar materials on the HUD Exchange, as we talked about at the beginning of this session. Both the slides and recordings are located there on the HUD Exchange. Now, this recording will follow in a few days, but the other recordings are available. And if you scroll up into the chat, you can access that chat link directly. But you can also search for them on the exchange. We do have an office hours on forms that is scheduled for the week after Thanksgiving. So giving everybody a break next week because we know lots of folks are going to take time out to spend with their families and their loved ones. We encourage that for sure. So the office hours for this session is scheduled for the week after Thanksgiving. And I believe it's on the 30th, right, Randall? Yep. There you go.
There it
On
is. Yes.
the
2
30th
to
from
3:30 p.m.
Yep. Excellent. So this is going to give you a chance to discuss any questions you have, any lingering concerns about forms. Certainly, if this was your first introduction to forms, you may want to go back and take a look at those forms that we reviewed today now that you have an understanding of which ones are applicable to your program. And then you can come with any questions on the 30th. We have our emails here on the screen. So if you have any follow-up that you'd like to do from today's session, you can reach Randall at rmullen@tdainc.org or myself,jalpha@tdainc.org. And we'd be happy to either assist you or get you to the right folks who can assist you if we're not able.
Yes, indeed.
So we have some resources listed here on this slide. Just start off by saying that the HUD Exchange is a wealth of resources for all HUD programs, and the CPF program has really done a wonderful job of creating a landing page and a set of materials on the landing page that is really useful for grantees, including things like step-by-step instructions and good DRGR guidance and things like that. So make sure that you check out the CPF website.
And be sure to add your name, by the way, to the mailing list, because it is possible that the grant guides will be updated. And when they are, you want to be notified so that you can follow the up-to-date guidance.
Absolutely. Those listservs are a gold mine for folks because they will keep you in the know in real time on things that are coming from HUD in terms of guidance, new resources that you can use, new tools, things like that. So updates, announcements, all those things. Make sure that you've signed up for that listserv. And the listserv sign up, we did review in some of the, did we review that today, Randall?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, so we reviewed that at the beginning of today, and we reviewed at the beginning of some of the other cohorts as well. So you can always go back and pull slides and take a look at where you find the links for registering for the listserv. So a couple other resources I'll just go over real quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. If you need the information to contact your grant officer, if you don't have that handy, there is a web link there where you can see the portfolio assignments. We have a link on this slide for the grant guide itself. We've referenced that throughout this session and throughout the other sessions as well. That is your go-to source of information for what's required for your application. And then we also have a link here for the regional environmental officer contacts. We know environmental is something that can be very, very daunting for folks. So those are the contacts there. There is a AAQ that you can use if you have questions after this session, after the office hours. If you want to just submit an AAQ through the HUD Exchange, you can do that with the CPF AAQ pool, and then expert will answer you in just a few days. And then coming soon, we do have CPF desk guides that will be coming out on a range of topics. All right. The last thing we'd like to ask for your participation for today is to complete an evaluation. The evaluations are so helpful because they allow us to understand what you need in order to complete a successful application, what concerns are on your mind, how this cohort went. Was it helpful for you? Are there things that we could have done better? What worked the best? And that will help us really plan better for next time. So we have a QR code on the screen, makes it super easy for you. You can just grab your cell phone, open the camera, hold it up, and you will get a little link that pops up. You click that link and it will take you right to the evaluation form. So if folks can just take a couple minutes to do that now, then it'll save us the time and you the energy of seeing the emails where we ask you to complete the evaluation.
Right.
So we're going to give you a minute to go ahead and grab your phone and just hold it up. Just take your little phone here, hold it up, put it right there with the camera, and then it'll grab the link right from that QR code and take you directly to the evaluation form. We'll give everybody about a minute to go ahead and at least open that form so that it's there for you to complete. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. I know we're about at the end of our time together. Please go ahead and complete that evaluation if you haven't fully completed it yet. It's a pretty simple, straightforward one. It'll just take a couple minutes of your time if you haven't already finished, and we appreciate that feedback. And with that, we will wrap up today's session as well as the formal presentations of the cohorts. Remember that we do still have an office hour session the week after Thanksgiving, and we will look forward to seeing you there. And in the meantime, have a wonderful holiday.
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.